Welcome to Raven Talk, the official podcast of the Raven Tribe. The Raven Tribe is a home for warriors on the path, and is dedicated to training warriors for the battlefield of life. Visit us on the web at theraventribe.com, where you can learn more information on membership, warrior training, as well as links to our official YouTube channel, Facebook group, apparel store, and our official bookstore, Marshall Books.
Welcome back, Tribe. Today we're here with special guest Jacob Truinstra from Mad Bull Knives, located in Princeton, Wisconsin. And we're going to be talking about combat knives, how they're made, and getting a professional knife maker's point of view and insight as to what makes a good combat knife. Jacob, how are you doing today?
Excellent. How's everybody doing out there today?
We're good. Thank you for being on the show with us. I'm really looking forward to picking your brain on combat knives and how they're designed and how they're made. Jacob, for the audience at home, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your background is in knives? Do you train knives? Do you just make knives?
Well, I train knives. I make knives. I design all my own stuff. I worked in a slaughterhouse for 18 years, obviously using a knife on a daily basis prior to becoming a full-time knife maker. And now this is my full-time employment, and I'm happy I took it. I've never been happier. I typically make all forged blades, and it works out pretty well.
So, Jacob, tell us a little bit about the process. And today we want to speak specifically about, combat knives and multi-purpose, utility knives that are, combat ready. What goes into, from your personal process, what goes into, first looking at the design of the knife? Are you working with designs that other people bring you? Are you coming up with your own designs?
I've pretty much come up with my own designs. A lot of it has been based on things that are tried and true blade concepts, blade designs and shapes that have been proven over millennia to just work. It's like the dagger designs, my Reaper, which is a real upswept, pointy knife, and my Warden. They're shaped like knives that you find in other places of the world that date back, hundreds of years. And being so because they didn't work. Mankind has developed some of the most efficient cutting tools ever. In the evolution of that pretty much ended, a couple hundred years ago. We kind of maxed out what designs can do. There's some changes in dual grinds and stuff guys are coming up with, which are phenomenally efficient. But, the tried and true basics, really lend themselves to usability in the field.
Great. So you're looking at history to look at what was effective for warriors in the past. Excellent starting point. Now, and that's an important thing because I honestly have picked up a lot of knives, and they're beautiful pieces of work. But I say to myself, the person that designed this or made this doesn't know how to fight with a knife because it's missing a lot of elements. So tell us something about your training. How does your personal training in knife work translate into your creation of the blades?
My personal training, I've been an Aikido student for quite some time too. And learning how to use sword techniques and just some of the Japanese blade techniques. Everything starts with a draw and cut in one motion. Musashi actually touched on that a lot in his book. And it's a lot of things we studied in Aikido as well. Everything's in a circular and in one motion. And when my personal combat knife, and I call it a combat knife, it is not a utilitarian knife. This knife is designed for using on people, is my Reaper. I make quite a few of them. And they can be found on my page. You can see what they look like on my Facebook page. But they come out in 8-2 cutting motion as your initial cut, and then there's a template that's followed after that. That's your basic template that flows with the knife. It's a very efficient and fast tool. That's basically what I've based a lot of my techniques, I guess you'd say, in training off of. And then there's other things out there. I mean, I've made crambits for some of the guys that are into that stuff. I've made, knives in just about every shape and size and description because of different people's training levels, different things they've trained in. But my personal training, I stick to my Reaper as a combat knife.
Now, Jacob, let me ask you, you're making these combat knives. You have some insight as somebody that's trained. You are, professionally, making these. Now, you're not working with, low-end materials here. Tell us about what goes into, the quality of the blades that you're making, because you have some high demands. I mean, tell us a little bit about your clientele, because I think that'll put it in perspective. I mean, these are people that are going to be relying on these blades in actual combat.
Right. My clientele ranges vastly from the average hunter fisherman that just wants a really solid knife to collectors to soldiers to professional, I guess you would call them professional contractors, and everyone in between. But the materials I use in my knives are absolutely top of what I can get a hold of for the materials I prefer to work with. I use a lot of W2 steel for clay-tempered Hammond blades, which are what my Reapers are all made from. And I use a lot of 80 CRV2. And I have a vendor for both steels that has it on hand and does very well by me by that. But these steels, done with the techniques, the forging and heat treating techniques that I'm using, which the 80 CRV steel is a pretty basic, straightforward steel to work with. W2 can be a little tricky. That can be, if you really want to get maximum performance, you gotta there's some heat treating procedures that I do with it that are kind of risky for blade loss. But the blades that do survive are the metallurgical abilities and the cutting ability of those blades is nearly untouchable, in my personal opinion. And everything is hand forged. I don't have a power hammer. I don't use roller presses and roller mills and stuff like that. I got a 229-pound anvil and a pile of hammers and a bunch of tongs. That's how these things are made.
Now, Jacob, one thing I always talk to people about, and was something one of my mentors, passed on to me a long time ago. He said to me, it doesn't matter how great the blade is, doesn't matter how, well made it is. If the handle's no good, there's no point to having it. What kind of materials do you use? Yeah, what do you use for your handles? What kind of technique do you use?
Good point. Well, I use, most of my knives have bolsters or guards. I range in materials from using a silver and copper Mokum, copper, silver, brass, bronze, steel, multitude of metals for bolsters and guards. The actual handle itself would be scales in my knives because everything is full tang. I don't make anything narrow tang knives. I do my own stabilized woods. I buy woods, stabilize them through my own pressure and vacuum system. And, or I use like Micartas. I'm not a big fan of the D10s and carbon fibers. They just don't lend themselves, in my opinion, to, knives with I like the classic look, I guess you would say. I prefer to use high-end, really nice burled woods, exotic woods, rare woods, that, are professionally stabilized by myself or others, most of the time by myself. The handle designs I come up with, a lot of mine have kind of a minimal curvatures, one finger groove, sometimes two. If you look at mine closely and then you look at what a professional butcher uses for knives, you're going to see a lot of similarities in handle design. Because over the years, they've developed a handle design for its ergonomics and for the fact that it doesn't have necessarily a guard on them, but you're not going to slip on them either. When you're using a knife for 10 hours a day, you got to have a good handle. And I try to incorporate that in my experience from my past deployment to what I do today.
And that's an interesting, insight, because I've actually kind of oddly been able to talk to a few people that are really working with blades and have a background in butchery or have worked in the kind of work that you're talking about in the slaughterhouse. What other, lessons did you pick up, practical application of using that knife all day long that went into, some of the designs that you work on?
Oh, one, I'm a fan of things with a really good point. I see a lot of stuff coming out nowadays with certain types of modified cantos and almost like these triangular points. that are realistically fairly blunt. And they're, each to their own. Granted, nobody, we all can't make the same stuff. It'd get boring. But, in actual practicality and actual using, I found there's no substitute for having something really pointy. And some of my knives may not look that pointy, but when you actually get down to the geometry of them, if you were to actually pick one up and look at it, they're pretty ugly at the tip. They're sharp. Even my Warden, it looks like a K-bar design type blade tip, that buoy tip style. But you can actually take that tip and fix slivers out with it, because I bring my tips in so you can get that real fine penetration, that real fine cutting ability with them, which I found in just about anything, whether it's really hard use, combat use, saving your bacon in a Walmart parking lot, to cleaning squirrels. You need a good tip.
Now, Jacob, let me ask you, just, and you're going to be biased on this one, but I've had conversations with people, and as a knife instructor, people always ask me about what knives to buy. And the first thing I say to them is, what is your price range? And because, most people are, in my experience, are happy to buy, a stainless steel wall banger at the flea market, and they look shiny and they feel happy that they have a knife. And I tell them, invest a little bit of money in the knife. I said, let's look at your price range, and that's going to kind of guide where you go with it. Normally, I tell people, if you start getting, upwards of $300 that you're willing to spend on a blade, just forget about factory-made knives and go custom. And again, you're going to be biased on this as a professional knife maker, but what are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell the audience listening that maybe it's not that well-versed in knife making and what goes into it?
This is something that I was told by an individual I will not name in public because of who he is and what he does. But he looked at me one time, because it actually pertained to another piece of equipment I was looking at buying. And he said, why would you spend $50 here and hope it works when you can spend $500 over there and know it works? What's your life worth? When you get a knife from a custom maker, and not just me, there's dozens of us throughout this country and thousands around the world that they get up in the morning and light their forges, and they pretty much have all promised themselves that day, whatever leaves this shop today, if it's not something I could bet my life on, I'm not going to let anybody else bet their life on it either. And that's the mindset of many custom makers that make combat knives. And yeah, it's one of them, hey, you can go buy a $60, $70, $80, $100 knife from a large commercial company that probably is going to do just fine. Probably. But when things get real ugly, I can guarantee you this. Me and dozens of other custom makers around this country could look you in the eye and guarantee you, no matter what happens, that knife will get you home. And I think that's pretty important when you're looking at combat knives. You're looking at a life and death situation. Who wouldn't want the best? Who wouldn't want something that was made by somebody that would guarantee that this will not fail you? That's how I look at it.
Now, Jacob, what are some of the common things that can go wrong with a cheap fighting knife? I mean, if you're picking up a flea market knife and expecting it to be a good self-defense knife, where are the holes? Because I don't think people realize how many things can actually go wrong with that blade.
Well, number one, blade steel. A lot of heat treats done in commercial plants, especially places that are making cheap knives. You use mediocre steel and a pretty mediocre heat treat. You end up sticking let's say you stick an adversary of another combatant with this knife. People don't sit still when you put a knife in them. And your blade snaps off. Now what do you got? Nothing. The other thing is edge retention. You take a swipe and you catch a steel buckle on somebody's equipment and takes the edge right off your knife. Okay, it's still pointy. It might cut, but now when you go and put a slash number 2 across the top of his thigh, it doesn't even cut through his DDUs. What good did that just do you? tip breakage, prevalent. I mean, we all know a couple major companies that have a real problem with tip breakage. I mean, everybody's seen their folders with the tip broken off them. The stuff we make, a lot of the custom makers, and myself included, you won't have that problem. That's for sure. Because we test them. We beat them with hammers and do all kinds of stuff to them to make sure these things don't go wrong with our designs. A lot of your commercial makers, we were talking about steel, they'll make a blade out of eighth, quarter, or eighth, 5/32, 3/16, mediocre steel. Sometimes it's real good steel, depending on how much you're spending. I mean, you get into that $150, $200 range, they're getting some pretty decent steel. But you still look at the blade thickness. It's almost impossible to find something that's really good, really well heat treated, thicker than that. My blades, like my Reapers, my Wardens, a couple of the other knives I designed for that, they're made out of 1/4 inch and they're clay tempered, which means you could take, and if you can get enough torque on my blades, they will bend. I mean, you can bend them right over and they'll come right back because they're heat treated the same way a samurai sword originally was. They're soft towards the spine, and not necessarily soft, but they're springy. They're like a truck spring with a very hard edge. So when you do hit that steel buckle, you're not going to lose your edge. If you do bury that thing in, it's like a template I put on my Facebook page a few days ago showing how to use a Reaper. You can stick that knife into somebody and use it like a lever because it's got about a 5.5 to 6, almost a 6-inch handle actually. You can stick that knife in. Now you got a 7-inch blade buried in it that's 1/4 inch thick, and you have a 6-inch handle. And you got it stuck through the top of their shoulder, right behind their shoulder blade. You basically just steer them wherever you want them to go at that point. There's a lot of knives out there in production you can't do that with.
Jacob, tell me a little bit about the grind that you use on the blades.
Very good point. The grinds I use, what I do is I forge in my bevels to about 85% approximately. Most of my grinds are done on a 12-inch contact wheel. I do all hollow grinds. As far as I know, there might be a few guys out there, but I haven't seen my work yet on a regular basis doing hollow grinds with the Hammonds and the clay tempering because it's very difficult to finish. I figure out a way to finish it. Works well for me. But typically that's what I use. That and depending on the knife. I mean, like a Bowie, I'm going to put my grind in with the same wheel, and I'm going to leave my edge at probably about 50 thousandths thick. Now let's say it's somebody wants one of my light hunters with a 3-inch blade. I'm going to use the same wheel, same grind technique, the same hollow grind technique, but I'm going to bring that edge into probably about 15 or 18 thousandths at the edge. And then, because that basically, you want that to be a scalpel. You take a 3-pound Bowie, it doesn't necessarily need to have a scalpel edge, nor do you want it to have a scalpel edge because of the weight and mass of the knife you can create. Regardless of how good your steel is, you can create edge damage. If you hit something good and hard, you got too thin of an edge.
And Jacob, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, the process of knife making, there's, going back into the process of sword making, there's a lot of, myths and things that kind of surround, that process. And I've heard it said from more than one professional knife maker that it's, not sounding hokey or anything, but it's almost kind of, there's an element of spirituality that goes into making a knife. There's a process mentally, spiritually that the person working on the knife goes through, when they're making the knife. Do you feel that way? Is there something like that happens in your process? Can you share some insight about that?
Just like some of my customers, a couple well-known trainers that have my Reapers. My Reaper is probably the most notable one for this, and many of my customers can attest to this. They say they're alive. And the process I go through, I mean, I'm making knives the way they made them, except for, using a powered grinder to do my finishing on my blades and stuff, to get the bulk of my finishing done, I should say. A lot of it's still hand sanded finish, hand up finish, but, I look at it, put some sweat and some blood and some muscle making that knife and making it by feel. I'm not measuring out like this is exactly here and that's exactly there. Everyone is its own individual, and yeah, there is a spiritual and mental process you go through making a blade, and I do believe that in some ways when people pick up a knife and they go, wow, it's alive, it's lively. Well, there's lively as in, okay, it's quick and it's fast. And then there's the knife you pick up that was hand forged, and you pick it up and there's just something different about it. It's just something different. And that seems to be a consensus about amongst many of my customers and myself as well as some of my knives. Like I said, my Reaper being most notable for that. And some of my hunters. I don't know if you're all familiar with Mr. Mike Blackgrave out of San Antonio, Texas.
Yes.
But he is a big proponent of my knives, and he tells everybody that, yes, they're very much a living thing. And, yeah, I believe that's absolutely true.
And, Jacob, before we wrap up, do you have any advice that you want to share with the audience when they go out to look for a knife, when they're choosing, and sometimes for some people it's going to be a hard choice to, upgrade and save a little bit of extra money and spend a little bit of extra money on a blade. Any parting words you have for the audience?
Well, one thing to always keep in mind, obviously we all have to live within our means, but buy the best you can buy. If it means you need to save up for 6 months, 3 months, 2 months, whatever it's got to be, make payment arrangements with a custom maker. Most of us makers are real good about payments. We're good about that stuff. Get the best you can get, especially when you're looking into a combat knife. And trust your knife maker. We've been doing this, all of us, a lot of us that are doing well have done this for years. And, a lot of people have their own ideas and their design what they'd like, but trust your knife maker while you try this, you'll like it. That's all I can really say. Trust your knife maker. Get what you can afford to get. But remember, your life may depend on this knife at some time. And what would you rather have? Something is getting this guy would be willing to bet his life on, or do you want something that was run off the production line?
And Jacob, where can the audience at home find you? If they want to take a look at your portfolio, if they want to pick out a knife and get in touch with you and talk specs and prices, where can they reach out to you?
They can contact me on Facebook, Jacob A. Truinstra, Tuinstra. I'm open to Messenger. Send me a friend request. I got 4 years worth of work in my albums on there. Feel free to browse, throw me a friend request, hit me up for a chat on Messenger. I'm always around.
Great. Well, Jacob, I want to thank you for taking time out to speak with us today, and definitely I'm a big fan of your products. I'm looking at getting one in my collection very soon as well. So I recommend to everybody out there listening to definitely, touch base with somebody that's taking a lot of pride and a lot of effort into their product. It's definitely worth it. Like Jacob said, it's your life on the line. You want to have the best tool you can possibly have. So again, Jacob, with that said, thank you very much for being part of the show today, and we look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and you have a great day.
You too, sir.